Jackson Maddox, a feared billionaire with a frozen heart and a haunted past. Alina Monroe, a forgotten girl sold like property, but born to change his world. The wind outside howled like a warning. 17-year-old Alina sat curled up on the old couch in her uncle's trailer. The heater had broken again, and the chill of the night crept into her bones. She hugged herself, more out of habit than warmth. Loneliness was colder than any winter wind. She had gotten used to it. Since her parents died in a car crash 3 years ago, Alina had lived with her Uncle Roy, a man who saw her as nothing more than a mouth to feed. He didn't speak kindly. He didn't ask her how she felt. He didn't see her tears. He didn't see her at all. She was invisible. In her small Georgia town, people whispered about her skin, about her place. She had heard the names they called her. She had seen the looks, the disgust, the fear. Being poor was one thing. Being black, poor and alone made her a target. But she survived. Every day she woke up, went to school, and dreamed of getting out, of finding something better. She wrote poetry in a tattered notebook and dreamed of one day being free. But that night, her dreams were sold. She heard the door slam. Heavy boots stomped across the floor. Uncle Roy didn't say a word to her. He just nodded at the tall, shadowy man standing behind him. Alina's heart sank. The man's face was covered in darkness. His voice was low, clipped. "She's younger than I expected," he said. "She's strong," Uncle Roy replied. "Quiet, won't be a problem." Alina stood up, her voice shaking. "What's going on?" Neither man answered. The stranger stepped closer, reached into his coat, and pulled out an envelope, thick with cash. He handed it to Roy without even a glance. Then he looked directly at Alina, and though he didn't smile, something in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. "You're coming with me," he said simply. "No," she whispered, backing away. "You can't just—" Her uncle grabbed her wrist roughly. "You do what you're told, girl. Don't make this worse." And just like that, she was pulled into the night. No goodbye, no choice, no freedom. The black SUV parked outside looked like a monster waiting to swallow her whole. The man opened the door. "Get in." She hesitated, ran, just for a second. But the cold metal of his hand on her shoulder stopped her instantly. Not violent, just final, like steel. In the car, silence sat heavy between them. Alina clutched her backpack. Inside it were three things: her poetry notebook, a broken locket with her mother's picture, and a single pencil. That was all she owned. She wanted to scream, to cry, but fear wrapped around her voice like barbed wire. So she sat in silence and stared out at the black road. After an hour of driving, she finally asked, "Where are you taking me?" The man didn't look at her. "To the one who paid for you." The words hit her like a slap. "Paid? For me?" He nodded once. "Jackson Maddox." The name echoed in her mind like thunder. She had heard that name before. Everyone had. He was America's shadow king, the man behind secret deals, cold corporations, and ruthless takeovers. Billionaire, untouchable, dangerous. Rumors said he had a heart of ice, that he never smiled, that he had destroyed lives without blinking. Some said he had people removed if they disappointed him. Others said he didn't even bleed. And now, she was going to him? "But why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer. The mansion came into view like a nightmare painted in gold. Endless gates, stone lions, guards, cameras, lights. She had never seen anything so big or so cold. The doors opened by themselves. A woman in a black suit stood inside. "This way," she said. Alina followed her through long halls that smelled like lavender and steel. Her boots echoed on marble floors. The walls were covered in silent paintings. No laughter, no warmth. She was taken to a room. It was beautiful, too beautiful. A bed with silk sheets, a window with a view of the stars, a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a castle. "Wait here," the woman said and left. Alina stood there, shaking, not because it was cold, but because she didn't understand anything. Why would a billionaire buy her? What did he want? Was she a servant, a toy, a prisoner? The door creaked, her heart jumped. In walked a tall man in a dark suit, his eyes hidden in shadow. Jackson Maddox. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. Long, quiet, like he was trying to figure something out. His face was unreadable, his lips were tight, but there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't name. Not cruelty, not desire, pain. Finally, he said, "You're safe now." She blinked. "Safe?" He nodded. "No one will hurt you again." She didn't believe him. How could she? The world had never been safe for girls like her. But then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone. No chains, no locks, no threats. Just a girl in a silk-covered room, bought by the coldest man in America, who had just said she was safe. And for the first time in her life, Alina realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The sun rose slowly over the vast estate, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. But the beauty couldn't touch the coldness inside Jackson Maddox's mansion. To Alina, it felt less like a home and more like a palace carved from ice. She awoke in silk sheets each morning, but they felt like snow against her skin. Luxurious, yes, but empty. The room was larger than her entire childhood home. It had a chandelier that sparkled like diamonds and curtains that swayed like they were dancing with ghosts. Yet nothing in that room brought her peace. She spent her first 3 days in silence. She ate alone. She walked the marble hallways alone. She stared out massive windows that overlooked perfect gardens, but no one ever smiled. The staff wore uniforms and tight expressions. They spoke in soft voices and avoided eye contact. Even the air felt cold. Every inch of the mansion whispered of control and power. Each time she passed a hallway mirror, she barely recognized herself. The girl in the reflection wore clean clothes, soft slippers, and had hair neatly brushed by one of the maids. But her eyes were still the same, tired, questioning, unsure. She hadn't seen Jackson since the first night. No threats, no orders, no explanations. It was almost worse than cruelty, this strange kindness wrapped in distance. She thought he would treat her like a slave, or a possession, or something darker. But instead, he vanished, until the fourth morning. She stepped into the main hall, and there he was, Jackson Maddox, leaning against the banister, dressed in a black tailored suit, sipping coffee like he didn't rule the world. He didn't look at her directly, but she felt his gaze anyway. It was strange. His eyes didn't have the cold anger she'd imagined. They looked heavy, tired, as if he hadn't truly slept in years. And yet, he said nothing, just nodded once before walking away. She stood frozen in place, heart racing. Why is he watching me like that? As the days passed, it became a quiet dance. She would pass by a doorway and find him already standing there. She'd read in the library and feel his eyes from behind the shelves. She'd sit under the tall tree in the garden and hear his footsteps, steady and slow, as if he wanted her to know he was near but didn't dare come close. It wasn't threatening. It was haunting. She started to notice little things. The way he touched the photo on the wall when he thought no one was watching. The way he clenched his fists during storms. The way his mouth moved when he watched her laugh with the old gardener. Like he wanted to smile but had forgotten how. She asked the housekeeper one day, softly, "Why did he buy me?" The woman looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "He's not the monster people say. He just doesn't know how to feel anymore." That night, Alina sat on the edge of her bed, holding her notebook close to her chest. She had spent years writing about freedom, about escape, about never being owned. And now, she was here, not chained, not abused, but still confused. Was this a prison made of velvet, or something else entirely? The next morning, she found a gift on her bed. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't expensive clothes. It was a box of pencils, soft graphite, different shades, sketch pencils, and a notebook with blank pages. No note, just those simple things. Her fingers trembled as she opened the notebook. She hadn't drawn since her parents died. Her uncle had always said art was for fools who didn't need to eat. She didn't know how he knew she loved to draw. But somehow, Jackson had known. Her heart skipped. That night, she left a drawing on the hallway table. A small sketch of the garden under the moonlight. She didn't sign it. The next morning it was gone. In its place was a rose. Still no words, but everything was being said. He never touched her, never entered her room, never spoke more than a sentence. But Alina felt it, that quiet pull, that strange connection. He had bought her, yes, but now she was starting to believe. He didn't mean to. Maybe he had bought silence, obedience, control. But what he found in her was something he had long forgotten. Warmth, color, life. Still, she couldn't trust him. Not yet. Not fully. Not until she understood why a man like Jaxon Maddox, cold, powerful, feared by the world, looked at her not like she was his property, but like she was the one thing in his entire empire that he couldn't touch. The ice hadn't melted yet, but it was starting to crack. The rain that evening didn't fall gently. It crashed like sorrow from the sky. Lightning flashed across the long windows of the mansion, illuminating every sharp edge of the cold stone walls. Alina stood at the top of the staircase, hugging her shawl close. Thunder rolled like an angry drumbeat across the estate. The staff had vanished for the night, retreating quietly into their corners. Something in the air felt different, charged, uneasy. She had grown used to the silence, to Jackson's quiet appearances and mysterious disappearances. But tonight, something was pulling her. She moved barefoot across the hallway, her steps soft on the rug. Then as she passed the tall double doors of the west wing, the ones she had been told never to open, she heard it. A sound she had never imagined coming from the lips of the most feared man in America. Crying. Not soft, not delicate, but raw. The kind of crying that broke in the middle, like a heart had been ripped open, again and again, and it still hadn't learned how to heal. Alina's hand hovered over the door handle. She didn't mean to invade his privacy. She didn't even understand why she was reaching for it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper. She opened the door just enough to peer in. It was a library, massive, floor-to-ceiling shelves of books, dimly lit by firelight. And in the center, near a leather armchair, sat Jaxon Maddox. His face was in his hands. His suit jacket lay forgotten on the floor. A half-empty glass of whiskey trembled in his grip. Alina froze. She had never seen him like this. Not guarded, not composed, not powerful. Just human. Before she could decide whether to stay or slip away, he looked up. Their eyes met. There was no anger in his gaze, no shame, only sorrow. "I didn't hear you come in," he said, voice rough and cracked. Alina stepped forward slowly. "I can go." "No," he whispered. "Stay." She walked into the room, the thunder outside echoing her heartbeats. She sat across from him on a small stool, uncertain, quiet. The fire between them glowed like a secret. He didn't speak at first, just stared into the flames. And then, as if the words had waited years to be spoken, he began. "Her name was Naomi," he said. "My daughter. She had your fire, your eyes. She was 17 too." Alina's breath caught. "She was walking home with my wife. They were laughing. I should have picked them up, but I was stuck in a meeting, trying to close another deal." He paused, his jaw tightened. "Some men followed them. White men. They said Naomi didn't belong in this neighborhood. They said my wife was a disgrace for loving her." Alina's throat tightened. She already knew where the story was going, and it broke her. "They beat them," Jaxon said softly. "Left them in the street, like garbage. Naomi died at the hospital. My wife never woke up." Silence followed, a silence that screamed louder than thunder. "I built this mansion after that night," he continued. "I built walls around everything, around my business, around my heart. I became someone they feared, because if they feared me, maybe no one would hurt me again." Tears fell down his face, quietly now. He looked at her, really looked. "When I saw you, I didn't know what I was doing. You reminded me of her. Not in looks, in spirit. You stood straight when the world tried to crush you, just like she did." Alina's lips trembled. "You bought me. I know. He shut his eyes. It was wrong. I didn't mean to treat you like a thing. I just, I didn't know how else to keep someone safe. I thought if you were mine, they couldn't touch you. She stood up and crossed the space between them. Then, slowly, carefully, she sat beside him and placed her hand gently over his. I'm not afraid of you, Jackson. His shoulders shook. He looked at her like she was the first warm thing he'd felt in years. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to fall apart in front of you. Alina shook her head. You didn't fall apart. You took off the mask. He let out a shaky breath. You're not like her. I know that now. You're your own person. I just forgot what it felt like to hope. She looked into his eyes, deep and stormy. You didn't buy a ghost, Jackson. I'm real. I hurt. I feel. But I see you too. For what I really am. She smiled gently. A man who never stopped bleeding, but also a man who still knows how to feel. And in that moment, between thunder, tears, and firelight, something shifted. Jackson Maddox, the coldest man in America, allowed himself to be seen. And Alina, the girl who had only ever been invisible, allowed herself to see him. Not as a monster, not as a master, but as a man who had loved, lost, and now somehow was daring to love again. The warmth they had begun to share was fragile, like a candle in the middle of a storm. For weeks after that night in the library, something shifted between Alina and Jackson. The distance began to shrink. He no longer hid behind closed doors or buried himself in meetings. He would join her in the garden, not speaking much, just sitting quietly beside her while she sketched or read. And every now and then, their fingers would brush. He would offer her coffee, black, just like she liked it. She would tease a smile out of him, and he would pretend not to enjoy it, but his eyes always gave him away. Still, nothing was said out loud. Not yet. Not until they were both brave. Enough to name what was blooming between them. But while love was quietly growing, danger was already watching. Jackson's world wasn't built on kindness. It was built on power, silence, and fear. And those who had once stood beside him, those who fed off the old version of him, the cold-hearted empire builder, began to notice the change. His calls were softer now, his decisions less brutal. He pulled out of risky deals, refused shady partnerships. He was trying to become a man his lost daughter would be proud of. But in the business world, kindness looked like weakness. And Alina looked like the reason. They watched her, studied her, learned her schedule. She had started volunteering in a community arts center downtown, something she had asked Jackson to support. He agreed without hesitation, even arranged a driver to keep her safe. But one rainy afternoon, as she stepped out of the center alone, just for a moment to grab something from the corner store, the car was gone, and so was she. Back at the mansion, the storm inside Jackson's heart was worse than any weather. The moment the call came in, her driver unconscious, her phone left behind on the wet pavement. He dropped everything. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't hesitate. He canceled meetings, emptied bank accounts, called in favors from the darkest corners of the country. This wasn't about power anymore. This was about her. Find her, he growled to his head of security. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what laws you break. Bring her back. His hands shook for the first time in years. He hadn't realized how deeply he had let her into his soul, how much she had softened the concrete walls inside his heart. Until now, when she was gone, taken by people who saw her only as a pawn. Hours passed, then a day, then two. His chest ached like it was being crushed. And then finally, location, a warehouse, abandoned, remote, monitored by drones and watched by guards loyal only to him. Jackson arrived before anyone else. He stormed in like thunder itself, his black coat soaked in rain, his fists clenched like steel. The men who had taken her didn't even see it coming. In under 7 minutes, they were on the ground, handcuffed, bleeding, and silent. And there she was, tied to a chair, bruised but breathing. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Jackson! He ran to her, dropping to his knees, cutting her free with shaking hands. Her lip was split, her arm scraped, but she was alive. He pulled her into his chest and held her like she was the only air left in the world. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, voice cracked and broken. "I'm so, so sorry." She clung to him, her tears soaking his collar. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I would have burned the whole country to find you," he said. "You're not just someone I'm protecting. You're not just someone I rescued. He stopped himself. She looked up at him. "Say it." He cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I never meant to fall for you. God knows I tried not to. But I did." Her heart beat so loudly she thought it might shatter her ribs. He continued softly now, like every word cost him something. "I don't love you because you remind me of her. I love you because you made me feel again. You saw me when no one else did. You forgave me when I didn't deserve it. You taught me how to be human again." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled. Then, without thinking, without fear, she kissed him. Not desperate, not forced, just full of every unspoken truth between them. It was a kiss of healing, of hope, of something real born in the ashes of pain. He held her tighter than he ever thought he could. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "You don't have to protect me like glass. I'm not breakable." "I know," he whispered back. "But God, I never want to feel that fear again." They stood there, two souls who had seen the worst in the world, and somehow still found love. The warehouse, once full of shadows, now held the light of something rare. And though danger still lingered outside, though enemies would not disappear overnight, they had each other. Not as savior and saved, not as billionaire and girl, but as two people who had every reason to stay cold and chose instead to love. The nights after her rescue were different. Alina didn't sleep easily, not because of nightmares, but because everything inside her felt too big to rest. She would lie in the enormous bed Jaxon had once insisted was hers and stare at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of security outside, the wind brushing against the windows. She was safe, but that wasn't what kept her awake. It was him, Jaxon Maddox, feared, powerful, broken, and somehow hers. He checked on her every night, not like a man guarding a treasure, but like a soul terrified to lose something he hadn't even believed he deserved. One evening, as she sat curled by the fireplace with a blanket around her shoulders, he approached her, more cautious than ever. "I was wrong," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "About everything. About how I tried to control the world. About how I handled you. About how long I waited to face the truth." She looked at him, this man of iron, now melted by feeling, and whispered, "You don't have to apologize anymore. You already proved everything when you chose love over power." But still, he shook his head. "I need to do more," he said. "For you, for her, for the world." She didn't ask him to go public. She just told her truth. She spoke softly to him one afternoon as they walked hand in hand through the garden behind the mansion. "I used to feel like I didn't belong anywhere," she said. "Like the world was made to keep people like me out. My skin, my voice, my story. It was always a reason to be ignored." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I never felt safe, not even in my own town," she continued. "But when you cried in front of me, when you let me in, it gave me hope. If someone like you could change, maybe other people could too." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said, holding his gaze, "maybe it's time you helped others feel that too." He blinked slowly. "You want me to speak publicly?" She shrugged. "You don't owe anyone your pain, but maybe sharing it could help heal more than just us." He didn't answer right away. But later that night, he sat in his study, staring at a photograph of Naomi, his daughter, next to a lit candle, and he nodded to himself. The announcement came 2 weeks later. It shook the media like thunder. Billionaire Jaxon Maddox to speak live on national television. No one knew what it meant. Speculation flooded the internet. Mergers, scandals, maybe even retirement. But no one expected the truth. On the night of the broadcast, the studio lights were bright, the room silent. Alina sat backstage, her hands clenched in her lap. She had offered to stay behind, out of view, but Jaxon had simply said, "I want them to know about you." When he stepped in front of the cameras, he didn't wear a tailored suit or speak with rehearsed confidence. He wore a plain black shirt, no tie, just honesty. The host welcomed him, but he didn't waste time. "I came here tonight," he said, looking into the lens, "because I've hidden for too long." He paused. "I built an empire on silence, on fear. I used money to erase pain. I let grief turn into control." And then his voice broke. "My daughter and wife were killed in a racially motivated attack. I never said that before. I never told the world that my heart was ripped from me because of hate. I buried it, and I buried myself too." The world listened. Alina could feel it, even behind the screen. America was holding its breath. "I tried to live without feeling. I thought it was safer that way," Jaxon continued, "until someone walked into my life. Unexpected, unwanted by others, but brave enough to see through the walls I had built." He looked off camera, directly toward where she sat. "Her name is Alina. She didn't save me. She didn't need to, but she reminded me who I was before I forgot how to feel." Then he turned back to the world. "I was a man who ruled by fear, but I'm not proud of that. I'm proud that I changed, that I fell in love not because of power, but despite it, that I found hope again in someone society tried to forget." The host cleared her throat, teary-eyed. "Jaxon, what do you hope people take from this?" He looked straight into the camera. "If I, a man with every reason to hate, can choose love, then why can't we all? If I can change, so can this country." He paused, voice steady, heart full. "It starts with listening, with honoring pain, and with protecting those who've been silenced for too long." The broadcast went viral. People cried. People argued. People began to talk. And for the first time in decades, Jaxon Maddox wasn't known for coldness or power. He was known for honesty. He stood at Alina's side after the show, facing the flash of cameras and waves of questions. And when a reporter shouted, "Is she your girlfriend?" he didn't flinch. "She's the reason I found myself again," he said. "She's everything I needed and never knew I was allowed to have." Alina smiled, tears in her eyes. That night, as they returned to the mansion, he wrapped his arms around her on the balcony under the stars. "You changed me," he whispered into her hair. She rested her head against his chest. "Number you were always there. You just needed a reason to fight again." And in the silence between their heartbeats, the past didn't hurt as much anymore, because it had led them here, to healing, to truth, to love born not out of perfection, but out of pain, and the power to rise beyond it. The world did not shift all at once. There were no parades, no magic buttons that made racism disappear, no sudden change of hearts from those who had carried hate for generations. But something stirred. Jaxon Maddox's confession on live television didn't just make headlines. It cracked something open in people who had never thought twice about injustice. A man of power, privilege, and pain had stepped forward and shattered the mask he had worn for years. And in doing so, he lit a torch for others to follow. Letters came pouring in, some filled with thanks, others with anger, but many more with stories. People who had lost loved ones to hate, people who had been afraid to speak. Young people, especially young black girls, who wrote to Alina saying, "You make me feel seen. You give me hope. You survived what I'm still going through." Alina read every single letter. She cried over most of them. And then she turned to Jaxon, one morning while they sat by the kitchen window sipping tea, and said, "I want to do something that matters, for them." He nodded. "I've already started the paperwork," he said with a smile. They called it Hope Rebuilt. It started as a single idea, a foundation to support youth affected by racism, violence, and abandonment. But it became so much more. Jaxon donated millions from his own accounts, not as charity, but as restitution. Alina handpicked the first board members, most of whom were young people with stories like hers. Survivors, fighters, dreamers. The foundation offered therapy, scholarships, mentorship, safe housing, and creative programs. Art, writing, coding, healing. They didn't just offer a place to survive. They created places to grow. And everywhere they went, people asked about their story. Alina never shied away from the truth. I was sold, she would say, her voice calm and steady, because I was seen as worthless. But someone looked again, and he didn't see a product. He saw a person. They traveled across cities, met with senators, and helped draft reform policies that targeted child trafficking, foster care neglect, and racially biased institutions. But the most powerful moments happened off camera. In community centers, when little girls hugged Alina tight and said, "I want to be like you." In schools where Jaxon knelt down to tell young boys, "You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to dream." And in quiet moments like the one in the hospital, when Alina visited a girl who had tried to end her life, she held her hand and whispered, "I know what it feels like to be treated like you don't matter, but I promise you, you do. So much." Jaxon and Alina never married, not because they didn't love each other, but because the titles didn't matter to them. He called her my lighthouse. She called him my second chance. They lived in the mansion, now filled with music and laughter. The halls, once frozen in silence, now echoed with community meetings, teen workshops, and late-night dance parties when no one was watching. Jaxon even learned to laugh, loudly, unguarded. Alina painted again. Her work now hung in galleries and children's shelters across the country. Each canvas told a story of pain and how it didn't have to be the end. Then came the anniversary. 2 years after her rescue, the foundation had reached 10 states, thousands of children, and had changed legislation in 3. That night, they held a gala under the stars. Thousands attended. Donors, survivors, artists, activists. But the spotlight fell, as always, on Alina. She wore deep emerald green, her hair in a soft crown of curls, and her smile trembling with emotion as she stepped on stage beside Jaxon. He didn't need a microphone to hold her hand. She began, "There was a time I thought my story would end in a locked room, that no one would ever know my name, that my life would be forgotten, erased by people who thought my skin made me worth less." The room went still. But then someone saw me, not as a thing, not as a charity case, but as a soul, a fighter, a person. She turned to Jaxon, who nodded, pride glowing in his eyes. "He had every reason not to change," she continued. "Power, money, fear, but he did, and it taught me something." She looked back at the crowd. If he can change, so can we all. Applause thundered through the courtyard. But it wasn't just applause, it was awakening. That night, as they sat alone beneath the stars, Alina asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Jaxon looked at her, startled. "Regret what?" "Buying me," she said quietly. "That deal, that moment that changed everything." He took a long breath, then reached over, brushing his thumb against her jaw. "I regret every second I lived before knowing you," he said, "but I will never regret what brought me to you. Because that day, that mistake, became the beginning of my redemption." She didn't speak. She just leaned forward and kissed him, soft, slow, sacred. And in that moment, the pain of the past no longer held them captive. The world wasn't perfect. Hate still lingered in corners, in whispers, in laws and systems that took time to tear down. But change had begun, because a girl who was once soul now led others to freedom. And a man who had built walls had torn them down for love. Together, they didn't just rewrite their own stories. They gave the world a new one to believe in, one where healing was possible, where love wasn't blind, but bold, where change wasn't easy, but necessary, and where the heart, no matter how broken, could always begin again. Hate is learned, but so is love. Even the coldest hearts can melt, and one act of kindness can shake a nation.